All right, hello again, everybody. Welcome back to the channel. Thank you again so much for tuning in. This is episode number 1 of the Mike Show. But before we get started, if you like what you're hearing and seeing, please go ahead and hit the like button, hit subscribe, leave comments down below, all that kind of good stuff. Just helps to keep the channel moving forward here. So thank you so much if you've done so already. But as I mentioned, episode number 1, the Mike Show, what I wanted to start doing for you guys is to start doing some interviews with some people that work all throughout the aviation industry. Because I've really realized that there's a lot of different interests that come onto YouTube and come and watch these types of videos. And I really wanted to provide a wide cross-section to all of you folks out there that are watching of just some different topics that we can talk about. So I realize not everybody here is fully interested in becoming a pilot, or maybe you have some different facets of your interest in aviation. So like I said, I wanted to start doing some interviews with people that can kind of tell you about a few different ends of the industry, if you want to say that. So episode number 1, very special one for me. I've got my friend Peter. Say hello, Peter, to everybody out there watching.
Hey, Mike, thanks so much for having me. It's an absolute honor to be here.
I really appreciate you being here. So just to give you guys a little bit of background, Peter is a medical professional in the aviation field specifically. So we're going to talk a little bit about his career and how he got into this and all this kind of stuff. So like I said, I hope this is relevant and I mean something to you guys. So I'm just going to jump in and start interviewing you, Peter. So the first question I have for you is I want you to tell everybody about your aviation interest and how they got started.
Yeah, so I think probably like a lot of people who are in aviation, it's hard to pinpoint a single time that you can look back on when you're really inspired to get into aviation. I grew up under the flight path for San Jose International Airport. Literally from the time I was like 1.5, I was watching airplanes landing and listening to airplanes landing every few minutes into San Jose. And I think I would be remiss in not saying that caused me to always be looking skyward from a very early age. I think when things really turned an interesting corner and kind of started defining a path, put me on a path that ended up leading to where I am today, was when my dad took me to my first air show when I was 11. So we went to, I think it was 1998. We went to an air show in Stockton, California. I watched the Blue Angels fly. I watched a number of air show performers, Sean Tucker, et cetera. And I remember thinking at that point, like, I want to do that, and I want to be flying upside down. Sooner rather than later. And that from there on out, the path changed multiple times, but the end goal has always remained the same. Like, I want to be flying upside down.
Excellent. So this kind of sounds like it dates back to your recollection, maybe 5 or 6 or earlier, or
I think probably even earlier, yeah. But definitely when I was young, but definitely like a critical point when I was about like 11-ish, where I was like, man, this is definitely something I want to do. Okay, excellent. Well, I think that's certainly a common thing that a lot of us that are interested in aviation, you've probably had this love affair for a long period of time. So it's really neat to hear that you had that as well. So the second question I had for you is, did you ever consider flying professionally? And if so, what changed your mind, or how did that decision evolve in your life? Yeah, so I absolutely did. And for those of you who may not know, Mike and I actually met initially fueling jets, which was one of my first jobs out of high school. And at that point, I was planning on being a commercial pilot, and not just being a commercial pilot. I wanted to be a military pilot, probably stemming from that early experience going to air shows and seeing that demo. But I planned on being a military pilot at that point, and I was kind of just thinking, I'm scraping money together, I'm going to go fly, and then I'm going to join the military, and that's the plan. I'm going to be a military pilot. Fortunately, that job, as a small portion of it, we would give these van rides to professional pilots, commercial pilots, to hotels and to the terminal for their next flight and those kinds of things. And I remember one pivotal conversation where I was telling this guy that I was planning on becoming a military pilot, and he said, that's great, but just keep in the back of your mind that if you do that, someday you're going to retire from that, and your main marketable skill is going to be that you're a pilot. And you're going to end up probably being me someday. And he's like, I enjoy flying. I did this because I love flying. But when I'm doing it like 4 or 5 days on the road and I go back home, the last thing I want to do is fly my own airplane in the hangar. So he's like, if I were you, I would find something you're good at, something you enjoy, and then I would keep aviation as a fun hobby for you. And that, at least for me, that really rang true. Okay. And from there on out, I was kind of on a search to find, okay, what else can I do that I can be really good at, but keep flying as a hobby.
Okay, so would you say, like, to encapsulate all that, was it maybe a large part of it was that it stemmed from the desire to maybe not be on the road constantly, or was that kind of large part of
I think a big piece of it, yeah, I think a big piece of it was lifestyle. And I definitely wanted that military piece of it. I definitely wanted a flying piece of it. But I didn't necessarily want to be on the road constantly. And I wanted to have it as a fun hobby, but not necessarily something I do every day.
Okay. Very fascinating. Thank you. Well, this kind of leads into the next question I have for you, and it's certainly a large part of the meat of the conversation that I wanted to have with you today, because you are somebody that you have cross pollinated or fused together an interest in the medical field with aviation, and that's a very fascinating thing, I'm sure, to a lot of folks. So I wanted, the next question I had for you is to just tell us specifically about that career track in general, and I want to know specifically about like what somebody that desires to do just that, combine these two things, like how exactly do you go about that, or what are your options, what can you do?
So I think there's a lot of ways of doing it. The military creates a unique opportunity to do it. In the civilian world, and I'll touch on that in a second. In the civilian world, it's a lot harder to do, and it's becoming increasingly harder to do so. But in the military, still, the position of what we call a flight surgeon, which is a commonly misunderstood term. It really just means a doc working in the medical community, and that term surgeon kind of dates back to like an old term from the 1920s where all docs were surgeons. In fact, barbers were surgeons. But flight surgeon kind of serves as a doc who takes care of the pilots. And our day in, day out goal is to keep pilots and the flight crews ready to fly. And so there are times when I'm available 24/7 to make sure that my guys are ready to go. There are times when I'm just seeing people in clinic. And I'm not even working primarily as a flight doc in my current position, but that is kind of like our goal as a flight surgeon on the Air Force. And that's an easy way to kind of cross over medicine with flying, or medicine with aviation and the aviation mission.
Interesting. Well, I want to come back and talk about one thing specifically, like a little bit upstream, because like what you've laid out is like what somebody can expect, of course, down the line when you're actually qualified and you're actually in practice doing this sort of work. But like, at the beginning stages, right, you would say that you've probably got you have options about how to become a doctor, of course, and you chose to go the military route, which was phenomenal. I think you made a really smart decision for yourself.
Thanks.
But just I want you to describe to people a little bit, like, okay, you got the military route and you got like a civilian route, and like what does that look like for somebody that has no medical training? They're just maybe they just came out of high school and they want to do this. I mean, like, what are the general steps in each of those routes on both trackways, if that question makes sense?
Yeah, it makes total sense. So the path to becoming a physician in the United States, at least, and it's a little different in European countries, which is why I say that, but in the United States, at least, you must have a college degree. It doesn't matter what that is, but you must have a bachelor's degree, Bachelor of Art, Bachelor of Science, and it can be in anything. And then in addition to that, you have to have met the prerequisites to get into medical school. So usually that will be 2 years of chemistry, a year of biology, a year of physics, and then a semester of calculus. So you have to have at least done that in order to apply. You got to take the MCAT, which is almost universally regarded as one of the more difficult standardized tests, and you got to do really well on that. And then you apply. There are probably 100 medical schools across the United States, or somewhere around there now, and apply. Try to get in. It's very competitive. It becomes more competitive every year. And that's the most common route. The other way, if you really are in the high school years still, and you're already certain I want to be a doctor, and you happen to catch this, my recommendation is that you look into something called a BSMD program, where you apply straight while you're still in high school, early, often like your junior year of high school, you apply to already get into medical school. And if you get into one of those programs, again, very competitive, but if you get into one of those programs, oftentimes you don't even have to take the MCAT. Just keep a B average while you're in college, and you are guaranteed a spot in medical school already.
Okay, and that once again is the civilian.
That would be on the civilian side.
If you go that route, undergraduate is what you're saying.
Yeah. Thanks for clarifying, Mike. So on the military side of things, generally the path is exactly the same. Actually, you get your bachelor's degree. You make sure you've done your prereqs. You take the MCAT. You apply to medical school. You apply to civilian medical schools, which is what I did. And at the same time, you apply for a military scholarship. So the Air Force, the Army, and the Navy all have military scholarships available that will pay for all of your medical school in exchange for a 4-year commitment on the backside of that. The other option on the military side is that the military does have its own medical school, which is the Uniformed Services University of the Health Sciences in Maryland. That program has a little bit longer commitment. It's about 7 years active duty on the backside. But if you are positive you want to go military, you're likely want to stay career military, it is a good option.
Okay, excellent. So this made me think of one other question I think a lot of folks might have. So what we've laid out so far is that, you could say, and correct me anywhere along here if I'm wrong, but the civilian trackway, you kind of do it on your own. You can be a lot more selective, but of course you're going to take on a lot of debt probably, unless you've got, we all know that medical school is very expensive. So there's that route. Military side, it's like you said, you've got kind of like a laid out path in the grass, let's say, and then of course like the military, in exchange for your years of service is funding a lot of the schooling that you're going to undergo. But the question that I have is, let's say from a time standpoint, is any one trackway going to get you faster to like becoming a doctor, versus the other one, or like, and that's one question I have also too. If somebody coming out of high school, how many years does it take to get to like where you are, like what you're doing, being a full practicing doctor?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mike. So to answer your first question, no, the time period to become a doc is about the same regardless. It might be a little bit shorter if you happen to choose a major that already covers all those science classes and you don't have to take those science classes on the side or in night school or something like that, like I did. But as far as the timeline to becoming a doctor out of high school, it's about the same. To answer your second question, how long? Like how long did it take to get to this point from high school? Gosh, it's been a long time. So it's at least 4 years of undergrad. It took me 5, but at least 4 years of undergrad to get your bachelor's degree. If you have a few years in between where you're kind of prepping for medical school like I did, that's an additional 2 or 2.5, let's say. And then medical school is 4 years. And then after medical school, and I think there's a common misunderstanding, everyone graduates medical school with a medical degree. So either a DO or an MD, which are equivalent degrees. And then everyone at that point has the same training. But if you want to be a surgeon, you got to do 6 more years of training beyond medical school in order to become a surgeon. And if you want to become a neurosurgeon, oftentimes that's 8 or 9 years beyond that. I am an emergency medicine physician by training, and that's 3 to 4 years beyond medical school. So kind of putting that all together, so out of high school, that's 5 years of undergrad plus 2 years of prep, so that's 7 years. 4 years of medical school beyond that, that's 11 years. I'm terrible at math, but that's 11 years. Yeah. And then an additional 4 after that. So it's been almost 15 years out of high school that I've been in training until now.
So not only is it a long road, but I can just say, from knowing you over these course of years, I know that it's just a tremendous amount of studying and hard work and dedication that's required to actually walk this pathway. And, I don't know if, you probably affirm that or what have you, but it's just like an observation that I've always had and I've always admired and respected for somebody that goes down this track. I mean, just knowing that you've got that much school ahead of you and that much hard work ahead of you, it's like they don't just hand out doctor certificates to everybody. So it's commendable, I congratulate you on your accomplishments there and everything. And it's very impressive. But I think it's also worth, just stressing that to somebody that's looking to go down this career track, just to kind of know what you're getting yourself into, I guess you would say, know what a hard road is ahead of you. Right?
I agree.
Not for the faint of heart, right?
Agreed wholeheartedly, and I think I don't know how someone could have done it. I almost wish someone could have impressed upon me just how much of my life I would give up to get to this point. But I'll also say it's incredibly rewarding.
Sure.
I come home most days, and I'm just really, really happy to be doing what I'm doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that kind of caps off like this portion of the conversation. I mean, if you had like one chunk of advice to give somebody wanting to become an aeromedical professional, what advice would that be?
So I think explore as many options as you possibly can. And if it really is, you think probably like aerospace medicine or getting into this world, my recommendation would be that you just don't give up in pursuing it, that you just be absolutely relentless in pursuing that.
Excellent. That's very good advice. Let's see. One other question I had for you is, can you just wrap this all up in detail to us in a few more words about like how exactly like do you get to interface like with aviation, airplanes, pilots, like all this type of stuff in your day-to-day, or and I realize like you have a job in the military and that might differ from somebody that's practicing medicine outside the civilian world, but you have some knowledge of this. So like I said, I think that's just like a question a lot of people would have is like, how does this keep me engaged in aviation? How does this keep me plugged into the all that? And maybe you could just talk a little bit about that. one?
Yeah, so on the military side, just like on the civilian side, you have on the civilian side, for those of you who are maybe just getting into this, you have a doctor that you would go to maybe every 5 years, or maybe you go see them even more often than that when you're trying to keep your medical, which would be an AME, an aerospace medical examiner. And those tend to be civilian docs who are kind of just checking on you, making sure that you seem healthy, reviewing your medical records, and then signing off that you're someone who could fly an airplane without risk. The military is much more stringent about those requirements, such that it makes sense for the military to actually staff medical clinics where pilots and crew members can show up almost 24/7, like very regularly every day. They can just check in and be like, hey, doc, like I'm worried about this. I'm worried I'm not going to be able to fly, or this happened over the weekend, or I got exposed to this thing, or I'm going down range and it might involve this country. And so there's lots of things that go into that because from a military perspective, we accept less than a 1% annual risk per aviator that they could have an event that would incapacitate them when flying. And so that risk that risk tolerance is extremely small. And our mission is also often taking on a lot of risk by itself. So the goal is to keep our guys really, really healthy, and so that's how we interface.
Yeah. Well, and this is fascinating to me because, of course, if you had like as compared to a general practitioner who sees like just a wide array of clients or cases or what have you. I mean, you specifically you have this, of course, knowledge of flight physiology and all these things that pilots are having to deal with like in your day to day, and it's just like it's fascinating that you get to focus and have a little bit more emphasis on that with your medical career there. So I think that's pretty neat. Let's see. What can you tell us? What do you love the most about being an aviation medical professional?
I think, honestly, it comes down to the same thing that we all enjoy, which is I enjoy flying. A piece of it, which I didn't get to cap on in that last question there, was that flight surgeons in the military do fly. Generally, it's not getting stick time. It is, however, getting some time in the aircraft. So usually just with a goal of kind of interfacing well with your pilots, getting a feel for what it is that your pilots are really up against when they're at their most stressed moments or their body is under the most stress. It gives us flying with them periodically, gives us an opportunity to kind of experience that and see where they're working, and gives us a better appreciation for why we take care of them so carefully medically. And kind of what their goal is as far as health goes.
Yeah.
So I still enjoy flying is what it comes down to. And I think there's an element too, especially on the military side, where you kind of recognize you're contributing to something bigger than yourself. And there's a bigger mission. There is a larger goal, and you're contributing a piece of that. You really are like an important part of the team.
Fascinating. Very cool. And this just made me think of something. You and I had a discussion, over the years about what sounded like a really cool job to me. But, you were mentioning potentially becoming or applying anyways to be like the flight surgeon for the USAF Thunderbirds, which that would just be such a cool job.
I think it would. Yeah, I think it would be a unique opportunity, especially with that team. Like honestly, any military group that you're working with, you're dealing with generally pretty healthy people. And so there's a lot of other tasks that get added on to something like touring with a team, public relations type work, and then just going to schools, like telling kids like why you're doing what you're doing, representing the military, representing your team. I think it'd be a super cool job if something like that were to ever work out.
Yeah, that just sounds like one of the coolest avenues for an aviation medical professional to walk down. So
absolutely, yeah,
very cool. Well, all right, Peter, that's all the scripted questions I really had for you today. I just wanted to leave it open, and if you have anything else that you think somebody looking to go down this trackway should think of, or anything else you want to tell anybody that's interested in aviation medicine.
Yeah, so I think aviation medicine has a lot of avenues, and we've talked about a few of them. We've talked about the military side of things. On the civilian side of things, sometimes it's a similar kind of job where, like an airline, historically, some of the larger airlines will actually hire docs and keep them around for the purpose of kind of helping the airline navigate biomedical stuff, help them navigate maybe more difficult medicals for some of their pilots, representing some of their pilots in like accident investigations and those kinds of things. Those are all unique opportunities on the civilian side. NASA historically has had flight surgeons.
Okay.
So that would be a unique opportunity that even a non-military doc could get into if you're really interested in space medicine. That would be an option. And then I think the other side of things is like, okay, what about critical care air transport? Historically, critical care capable docs, so ER docs and ICU docs, intensivists we call them, or anesthesiologists who have that kind of experience as well, can get jobs flying on airplanes taking care of patients that are being transported. So you got a really critical patient, and now in addition to all of the physiologic, just being at altitude kind of stuff, you got a patient who at ground level might not be getting enough oxygen, and you got a tube in to help them breathe. You got to now navigate that at altitude. And really, really interesting things start playing into it. So, for instance, a lot of medical devices are actually filled with air in order to seal. But when you get to altitude, that's going to expand exponentially because there's less pressure at altitude. And so basically, a lot of medical devices can't be used. Sometimes also the way we treat like significant fractures is to hang a big weight on the leg in order to extend it. You can't use that at altitude because every time you pull G in the airplane, the weight is going to change in how much pull it's putting, how much traction it's putting, maybe on someone's spine or something of that sort. So it's not conducive to the patient's survival. So there's a lot of niches that you can get into.
Yeah.
As I said at the beginning, it's getting hard to get into those things on the civilian side, just because a lot of other medical professionals, like really qualified nurses, are kind of like taking those positions.
Yeah.
So a lot of the companies, for them, it makes economic sense to have that person be there instead of a doc. But nonetheless, there are a lot of unique opportunities. Yeah. And then I think maybe like the one last one I might mention, which is an even further down this niche line, would be something like being the flight doc for an activity like the Red Bull Air Races, or like an air show, or like the Reno Air Races, or something of that sort, where you're more dealing with a large event, and it's kind of event medicine. Or conference medicine kind of thing, but there is an aviation component to it.
Yeah. Well, and this also touched on something that I thought of, for if there's anybody out there that you're not looking to go like, full bore and like completely go down and, the whole track of becoming a doctor and investing those years. I mean, there's other things that would seem to me to be very interesting for somebody who wanted to be like flying around physically, but once again, not going through like the entire, doctor full on route. I mean, being something like a paramedic, like on an EMS helicopter, or like Peter had laid out, something like for a medical transport, they have nurses and things that like physically fly along like in the aircraft in these sorts of situations. I think there's a lot of different facets of those types of operations that, yeah, if you more on the paramedic type of interest level, that would be really cool to me to be able to fly along on missions and all this kind of stuff. So maybe a different avenue if you guys and girls are thinking, something along those lines. So I think, like Peter, you've laid out a lot of good trackways, and I think it's interesting too to just to point out and reiterate to people that, I mean, even within like the aviation medicine sphere, I mean, there's so many different little things that you get yourself into if that is your interest. So,
yeah, agreed wholeheartedly. Flight nurses, flight paramedics, these are great opportunities that require a lot less schooling on the front end and still give you lots of opportunity to be on the front lines and helping out.
Yeah, very exciting, very cool. All right, Peter. Well, I really appreciate you being here today. Thank you so much for your service, of course, to the country, but of course for sharing some information on this topic here. So once again, everybody, I really appreciate you tuning in. If you want to show some support, be sure to pick up your bus driver t-shirt down in the Teespring store there. So until next time, I hope you guys are staying healthy and happy, and we'll talk again real soon. Thanks for tuning in.